Ambassador Yuan Meilin stood at the viewport of her shuttle and watched the massive space station grow larger against the endless black of space, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she fought hard to keep hidden from her face. The Galactic Concord Assembly Station was everything the briefings had promised and more. A spinning wheel of metal and light that housed representatives from 347 spacefaring civilizations. And today, humanity would finally take its place among them after decades of working toward this moment. She smoothed down her formal diplomatic uniform one final time and took a deep breath as the shuttle glided into the docking bay, where strange lights flickered in colors her eyes could barely process an alien. Atmospheres mingled in carefully controlled sections. Ambassador Yuan, her aide Marcus whispered beside her. Remember that the Vel-Ori will speak first, and they tend to be rather direct in their assessments. Meilin nodded and squared her shoulders as the shuttle door slid open with a soft hiss, releasing her into the largest gathering of alien life any human had ever witnessed in person. The assembly chamber took her breath away completely, rising in circular tiers that seemed to stretch upward forever, filled with beings of every shape and size imaginable. Some floated in anti-gravity fields, while others sat in specialized pods filled with liquid or gas. And hundreds of translation devices hummed softly as countless conversations filled the air with a symphony of clicks and whistles and sounds that had no human equivalent. A tall crystalline being approached her, its body catching the light and scattering rainbows across the polished floor. And Meilin recognized it from her briefings as a Vel-Ori, one of the oldest and most respected species in the Concord. "You are the human ambassador," it said, the translation device rendering its chiming voice into flat monotone English. "We have prepared our assessment of your species for the assembly, and you may take your designated seat in the observation tier." Meilin felt a flicker of unease at being directed to the observation tier rather than the main floor. But she held her tongue and followed the guide drone to her seat, determined to make a good impression on this historic day. The assembly fell silent as the Vel-Ori High Arbiter took the central podium, its crystalline form pulsing with soft inner light as it addressed the gathered representatives. "We present today our species classification report on the newest applicants to the Galactic Concord," the Arbiter announced. "The beings known as humans from the planet designated Earth in the outer spiral arm." A holographic display flickered to life above the podium, showing images of Earth and its inhabitants. And Meilin felt a swell of pride as her homeworld appeared before the assembled galaxy. That pride quickly turned to confusion and then to cold anger as the Arbiter continued its presentation. "Earth has been classified as a Class II marginal world," the Arbiter stated, "and humans have been designated as endurance null soft bodies, ranking among the weakest sapient species in our records." A murmur of amusement rippled through the assembly, and Meilin gripped the arms of her seat so hard her knuckles turned white. "The evidence is clear and indisputable," the Arbiter continued, displaying a series of charts and biological diagrams. "Humans require 6 to 8 hours of complete unconsciousness every single day cycle, leaving them vulnerable for a third of their existence. They possess no natural armor, no venom glands, no bioelectric defense mechanisms. Their skin tears easily, and their bones break under minimal pressure. They can only survive within a narrow temperature range of approximately 30 degrees. And they expire within minutes without their specific atmospheric mixture." Laughter echoed through the chamber now, open and mocking. And Meilin saw a massive reptilian creature lean toward its companion and make a gesture that needed no translation. Furthermore, the Arbiter pressed on. "Humans have no telepathic abilities, no redundant organ systems, and a lifespan of merely 80 to 100 years. They reproduce slowly and require nearly 2 decades to reach maturity. By every metric we possess, They are among the least survivable sapient species ever catalogued. Maylin rose from her seat, her voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. "I object to this assessment," she called out, and the chamber fell into surprised silence at the interruption. "Your data is incomplete, and your conclusions are wrong. Humanity has survived ice ages and plagues and disasters that would have ended lesser species. We have walked on a moon and split the atom and please," a deep rumbling voice interrupted. And Maylin turned to see the massive reptilian creature rising from its seat, its scales gleaming like polished obsidian. "I am War Commander Kreth of the Kreth Dominion, and I have heard enough of this." The creature fixed Maylin with eyes that held nothing but contempt and amusement. "Little soft one," it said. "Every weak species claims to be strong. Every prey animal believes itself a predator. But the truth is written in your flesh and your biology. You are soft, you are slow, you are fragile. My hatchlings could tear your strongest warriors apart without effort." More laughter filled the chamber, and the Kreth commander made a dismissive gesture with one massive clawed hand. "The Kreth Dominion will not offer defensive alliance to a species that would be a liability rather than an asset," it declared. "Let the humans prove themselves in the outer fringe if they wish to be taken seriously. If any of them survive a decade there, perhaps we will reconsider." The vote that followed was swift and humiliating, with humanity granted only provisional membership and assigned to the outer fringe territories, the lawless border region that no established species wanted. Maylin walked back to her shuttle in silence, her aide Marcus struggling to keep pace beside her. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "what do we do now?" She stopped at the viewport and stared out at the stars, a reflection showing eyes that burned with quiet determination. "We survive," she said simply. "We build, we grow, and we wait. Someday they will understand what humanity truly is." And on that day, her communicator chirped urgently, and she activated it with a frown. "Ambassador UN," a panicked voice crackled through the speaker. "We have lost contact with New Tasmania Colony." The last transmission mentioned something in the sky, something descending in massive numbers. 40,000 colonists have gone dark, and we need immediate assistance. Malin felt ice form in her stomach as she turned to Marcus. "Get me a channel to Earth Command," she ordered, "and find out everything we can about what is happening on New Tasmania. Our people need us." As her shuttle departed the Concord station, she cast one last look at the gleaming structure that housed the galaxy's judgment of humanity. They had called humans weak, but they had never seen what humans would do when their own were threatened. And Maylin suspected that lesson was coming sooner than anyone expected. The sky above New Tasmania had turned black with bodies. Millions upon millions of winged creatures descending like a living nightmare upon the peaceful colony world that had been home to 40,000 human settlers just 3 days ago. Colonial Security Chief Marcus Okonkwo pressed his back against the reinforced wall of the community shelter and listened to the scratching sounds outside, the endless clicking and chittering of creatures that had already consumed half the northern settlements. "How many did we lose at Riverside?" he asked his lieutenant, though he dreaded the answer. 6,000 confirmed dead," Lieutenant Sarah Park replied, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Another 2,000 missing and presumed gone. The creatures are fast, Chief. Faster than anything we prepared for." Marcus closed his eyes for just a moment and forced himself to think past the horror, to see the situation as a problem that needed solving rather than a catastrophe beyond hope. The Varth swarm had arrived without warning 3 days ago, dropping from a carrier vessel that appeared from nowhere and dissolved into the atmosphere after releasing its terrible cargo. The first attacks came within hours. Waves of insectoid creatures the size of large dogs tearing through outlying farms with terrifying speed and efficiency. Now the survivors huddled in whatever defensible positions they could find, waiting for rescue that Marcus feared would never come. "Any word from the Concorde?" he asked. Sarah shook her head with a bitter expression on her face. "The Valori responded to our distress call," she said. "They have classified the Vorath as an extinction-level threat and declared standard containment protocol." "Which means what exactly?" "Which means they plan to evacuate whoever can reach the spaceport in the next 48 hours. And then they will sterilize the planet from orbit. Anyone who cannot reach evacuation ships will be considered acceptable losses." Marcus slammed his fist against the wall hard enough to split his knuckles. "There are 40,000 people on this planet," he growled, "and the spaceport can maybe handle 6,000 or 7,000 before the deadline. They are asking us to abandon more than 30,000 of our own people." "The Concorde does not see it that way," Sarah replied quietly. "To them, we are already dead. We are just numbers in a calculation. Soft little humans who should never have been sent to the fringe in the first place." Outside, the scratching grew louder, and Marcus heard the distant sound of weapons fire from the eastern perimeter, where a group of colonists had made their stand. He moved to the small window and peered out at the nightmare landscape, watching the Vora swarm across what had once been beautiful farmland. The creatures moved in perfect coordination, communicating through some hive mind connection that made them terrifyingly effective. But as he watched, Marcus noticed something strange. A group of Vorath approached a burning storage shed the colonists had set ablaze during the initial attack, and instead of pushing through the flames, the creatures stopped. They circled the fire at a careful distance, their wings buzzing with what almost seemed like agitation. "Sarah," Marcus said slowly, "come look at this." She joined him at the window and watched the same scene unfold. "They are avoiding the fire," she breathed. "They do not like heat." Marcus felt something spark in his mind, a desperate hope that refused to die. "Get me inventory lists from every shelter," he ordered. "I want to know how much fuel we have, how many flamethrowers, how much accelerant, and find me anyone who worked in agriculture or pest control back on Earth." Sarah stared at him with confusion. "Chief, what are you planning?" Marcus turned to face her with eyes that held a fierce determination born from generations of human stubbornness. "Back on Earth," he said, "my grandmother told me stories about locust swarms that would blacken the sky and devour entire harvests. Billions of insects moving as one, destroying everything in their path. These are not locusts." "Chief, no," Marcus agreed. "They are not. But the principle is the same. A swarm is a swarm, and humans have been fighting swarms since before we had written language. We burned them out, we poisoned them, we built barriers and traps, and we never stopped fighting until every last one was dead." He grabbed his rifle and checked the charge. "The Concorde may have given up on us, but I have not given up on my people. We are going to treat this like what it is, an infestation. And we are going to show these things what happens when you try to exterminate humanity." Far above in orbit, the emergency session of the Galactic Concorde was already in progress. Ambassador Yuan Mei Lin stood before the assembly once again, but this time there was no awe in her eyes, only cold fury. "You cannot simply abandon 40,000 people," she declared, her voice ringing through the chamber. "We demand military intervention. Send ships, send soldiers. Give us the weapons to fight back." The Valori High Arbiter regarded her with what might have been pity from a being made of living crystal. "Ambassador Yuan, the Vora swarm has consumed 17 civilizations across galactic history. There is no fighting them. There is only containment. Your people on New Tasmania are already lost. And the kindest thing we can do is prevent the swarm from spreading further. Then give us more time for evacuation." "There is no more time," the Arbiter replied. "The Vorath Queen will begin spawning within 72 hours. And once that happens, no force in the galaxy can stop their spread. The planet must be sterilized before then. This is the way of things, Ambassador. You must learn to accept loss, as all species eventually do. The Kreth War commander leaned forward with a rumbling laugh. Perhaps if your people were not so soft and weak, they could fight their way to the evacuation ships. But we both know that is beyond human capability. Accept your losses, little ambassador, and be grateful that any of your kind will survive at all. Maylin stood in silence for a long moment, her hands clenched at her sides. Then she spoke, and her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the vast chamber. You have made your position clear, she said, and so I will make ours equally clear. Humanity hereby withdraws from Concord evacuation protocols. We will not abandon our people to die while there is breath in our bodies and strength in our hands. The assembly erupted in confused murmuring. Ambassador, the arbiter said, what exactly do you intend to do? Maylin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We intend to fight, she said simply. We intend to win. And when this is over, you will understand why that is not the ridiculous statement you believe it to be. She turned and walked from the chamber, without looking back. Within hours, every human vessel within range of New Tasmania received the same message. A call for volunteers to attempt what the galaxy said was impossible. And from every colony, every station, every ship, the answer came back the same. We are coming. Hold the line. Help is on the way. In the observation center of the Concord station, a Kreth analyst watched with growing confusion as human ships began converging on the doomed planet. What are they doing? He muttered to himself. This is suicide. They cannot possibly believe they can fight the Varth. But as he watched more ships arrive, hauling cargo instead of fleeing with refugees, a strange feeling crept into his heart that he had not felt in many years. It was the feeling of witnessing something that should not be possible, something that defied everything he knew about the universe. It was the feeling of doubt. Admiral Kofi Asante stood on the bridge of the Taze, Defiance, and watched the green and brown sphere of New Tasmania grow larger in the view screen, his weathered face showing nothing of the fear that churned in his stomach. Behind his flagship, a ragged fleet of 47 vessels held formation. Everything from proper military cruisers to converted cargo, haulers to civilian transports that had been armed with whatever weapons could be bolted to their hulls. Admiral, his communications officer called out, we are receiving a transmission from the Concord observation post. They are demanding to know our intentions. Kofi allowed himself a thin smile. Tell them to watch and learn, he replied, and launched the cargo drops. I want supplies on the ground within the hour. Across the fleet, cargo bay doors opened and pods began falling toward the planet's surface, carrying not evacuees, but the tools of war. Industrial flamethrowers and chemical accelerants filled the first wave, followed by ammunition and medical supplies and field equipment of every kind. And most importantly, soldiers. Thousands of volunteers had answered the call, men and women from every human colony who refused to let their fellow humans die alone. They strapped into drop pods and sealed their helmets and said prayers to whatever gods they believed in as they fell toward a battle that the entire galaxy said they could not win. On the ground, Marcus Okonkwo heard the sonic booms of the arriving pods and felt tears sting his eyes. They came, he whispered. They actually came. Lieutenant Sarah Park appeared at his side with a fierce grin. First wave is landing at the southern perimeter, she reported. They brought enough firepower to burn this whole continent clean. Admiral Asante is establishing a command link now. Marcus grabbed his radio and keyed into the command frequency. Admiral Asante, this is Security Chief Okonkwo. I cannot tell you how glad I am to hear your voice. Save the thanks for later, Chief, the Admiral replied. What is the situation on the ground? We have approximately 32,000 survivors scattered across 18 defensive positions. The Vorath have been probing our perimeter, but have not committed to a full assault yet. I believe they are waiting for their queen to finish spawning. Then we hit them before that happens. I am sending you Tactical Command of Ground Forces, Okonkwo. You know this terrain better than anyone. What do you need? Marcus looked out at the swarm-covered landscape and felt his fear transform into something harder and more useful. Fire, he said simply. Lots and lots of fire. The counterattack began at dawn. Human soldiers advanced across the devastated farmland in coordinated waves, flamethrowers roaring and rifles cracking as they pushed back against creatures that had never faced real resistance before. The Vorath were fast and numerous, but they had never encountered prey that refused to run. Again and again they launched attacks against the human lines, and again they were driven back by walls of flame and storms of gunfire. In the Concord Observation Center, representatives from dozens of species watched the impossible unfold with growing disbelief. "They are advancing," a Velori analyst murmured. "This should not be possible. The Vorath are an extinction-level threat." The Kreth war commander leaned forward with narrowed eyes, his earlier contempt slowly transforming into something else. "Look at how they move," he said quietly. "They fight in shifts, cycling fresh troops to the front while exhausted ones fall back to rest. But the rest periods are so short. How are they maintaining combat effectiveness? The humans call it sleep discipline." Another analyst replied, "They are pushing through their rest cycles by sheer willpower. The medical data is showing massive stress hormone spikes, but they just keep fighting on the battlefield." A young medic named Yuki Tanaka sprinted across open ground to reach a fallen soldier, her small frame dodging between Vorath creatures that snapped at her heels. She slid into cover beside the wounded Marine and immediately began working on the terrible gash across his chest. "You came for me," the Marine gasped. "Those things were right on top of you. You are one of ours," Yuki replied as she sealed the wound with medical foam. "We do not leave anyone behind." Nearby, a 12-year-old girl named Sarah Chung crouched in a communication bunker and coordinated refugee movements across 3 different settlement zones. Her young voice calm and steady despite the chaos around her. "Group 7, there is a clear path through Sector 4 if you move in the next 10 minutes. She called into her headset. "Group 12, hold your position until the soldiers clear the bridge. Help is coming. Just hold on a little longer." She had been awake for 16 hours straight, but sleep was something that could wait until her people were safe. The Vorath adapted to fire by developing heat-resistant carapace, so the human scientists worked through the night and created new chemical compounds that burned hotter than anything the swarm had faced. When the Vorath adapted to those chemicals, human soldiers switched to kinetic weapons and engaged in close combat, fighting monsters with knives and fists and anything else they could grab. A Velori observer watched one such engagement with growing horror. "That soldier has a broken arm," he noted, "and yet he continues to fight. His body should be shutting down from pain response." Humans have the ability to override their pain response through adrenaline and determination, another observer replied. It is a biological adaptation from their homeworld that allows them to continue functioning despite serious injury. Their homeworld, the Velori repeated slowly. What else do we know about their homeworld? The Kreth war commander had been asking himself the same question, and he had ordered his analysts to pull the original survey data on Earth rather than relying on the sanitized Concord summary. What he found made his blood run cold. "Aye, Arbiter," he called out, his voice cutting through the chatter of the observation center. "I believe we have made a serious error in our assessment of humanity." The crystalline being turned toward him. "What do you mean, War Commander?" The Kreth commander pulled up the real data on Earth and displayed it for all to see. "Their atmospheric oxygen content is 21%, he said. "That is high enough to support rapid combustion. Their world is literally flammable." He scrolled through more data. They have millions of distinct species engaged in constant evolutionary competition. They have parasites that live inside their bodies, predators that hunt them on land and sea and air. Their planet has regions of extreme cold and extreme heat, and yet they colonized all of them. His voice grew quieter. Their average body temperature is 37 degrees, hotter than most habitable worlds. They evolved as pursuit predators who would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Their ancestors survived ice ages and supervolcano eruptions and mass extinction events. He turned to face the High Arbiter with something approaching fear in his ancient eyes. "This is not a Class 2 marginal world," he said. "This is a death world. A high-grade death world. We have been mocking the children of the death world, and now we are seeing what that truly means." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. On the surface of New Tasmania, Admiral Asante broadcast a message that every observation post in the sector could hear. "You abandoned our people," he said calmly. "You wrote them off as acceptable losses because you believed we were too weak to save them. Watch what we do for our own, and remember it. Because if you ever abandon humans again, we will remember that too." The next orbital strike hit with surgical precision, targeting Vorath hive clusters so close to human positions that any other species would have called it suicide. But humans trusted humans, and the soldiers on the ground did not even flinch as fire rained from the sky around them. They simply pressed forward into the flames and continued to fight. 11 days had passed since humanity declared war on the Vorath swarm, and the galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible slowly became reality. Every observation channel in the sector was locked onto New Tasmania, where millions of viewers witnessed something that had never happened in recorded galactic history. A species fighting back against the Vorath and winning. The battle had become a grinding war of attrition that tested every limit of human endurance. And somehow humans kept finding new limits to push beyond. Sergeant James Nguyen had been fighting for 36 hours, straight when a Vorath warrior slammed into his position and shattered his femur with a single blow. The pain was incredible, a white-hot lightning bolt that should have ended his combat effectiveness immediately. But James did not stop. He grabbed a piece of Vorath chitin from a dead creature, used his belt to strap it against his leg as a makeshift splint, and kept shooting for another 4 hours until medics could reach him. How is this possible? A Vel Ori medical observer demanded as the footage played across the observation center. His bones were broken. His body should have shut down from shock response. Humans experience something they call adrenaline, a colleague replied. It allows them to temporarily suppress pain signals and continue functioning through injuries that would incapacitate any other species. Combined with their psychological concept of duty, they become capable of feats that our models cannot predict. On day 7, the Vorath evolved resistance to the new chemical accelerants, developing carapaces that could withstand temperatures that would melt steel. The human scientists responded within 36 hours with a binary compound that only ignited when both parts mixed, creating flames so hot that they burned through the Vorath shells like paper through water. When the Vorath developed reflective shells on day 9, humans simply stopped using fire altogether. Footage spread across the galaxy of human soldiers entering Vorath tunnels, the enclosed underground networks where the swarm had every possible advantage. The tunnels were dark and cramped and filled with creatures designed specifically to kill, yet humans went in anyway. They used shotguns and grenades and combat knives, and in several documented cases that became legendary across 1,000 worlds, they used their bare hands. Private Maria Santos became famous for a recording that showed her throwing herself onto a Vorath warrior to protect a wounded comrade, driving her knife into the creature again and again while it tore at her armor, refusing to stop until the thing was dead. She survived with scars that she would carry for the rest of her life, And when reporters asked her why she had done something so dangerous, she simply shrugged and said that her friend needed help. The psychological concept of pack bonding fascinated and terrified galactic observers in equal measure. Humans would sacrifice themselves for other humans they had never met, would throw themselves into certain death to protect strangers who happened to share their species. This behavior was theorized to be evolutionarily disadvantageous, yet here it was driving an entire military campaign. Medic Yuki Tanaka became another legend on day 8 when her position was overrun by Vorath forces. She had 3 wounded soldiers who could not be moved, and evacuation was at least 20 minutes away. Standard tactical doctrine from any species in the galaxy would call for retreat and acceptable losses. Yuki grabbed the flamethrower and held the line alone. For 19 minutes she fought, burning and shooting and screaming defiance at creatures that towered over her small frame. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found her standing among the bodies of dozens of Vorath, her fuel tank empty and her rifle out of ammunition, holding a combat knife in one hand and a surgical tool in the other. "I promised them I would keep them safe," she said simply when asked why she had not retreated. She died 3 days later, holding another defensive position so that 4 wounded soldiers could be evacuated. Her last words were recorded and broadcast across human space. "Tell my kids I did not leave anyone behind." The turning point came on day 9 when Vorath behavior suddenly changed. Marcus Okonkwo noticed it first. The way the creatures were pulling back from contested zones and consolidating around a specific location in the northern continent. "Admiral," he called into the command channel, "something is happening. The Vorath are retreating, but not in a disorganized way. They are protecting something." Kofi Asante studied the tactical display and felt his stomach drop. "The Queen," he breathed. "They are protecting their Queen. She must be preparing to spawn. If she succeeds," his tactical officer added grimly, "we lose everything. She can produce millions of offspring within hours. We need to take her out now." Kofi made his decision in an instant. "All ships, this is Admiral Asante. We are moving to intercept the Vorath Queen. This is the endgame, people. Everything we have been fighting for comes down to this." The fleet moved into position as ground forces pressed the attack from below, driving the Vorath back toward their Queen in a desperate attempt to force a confrontation. Then the Queen rose. She was massive, easily the size of a small starship, her bloated body lifted by wings that should not have been able to support her weight. The Vorath swarm rallied around her as she climbed toward the upper atmosphere, trying to escape the planet and spread her terrible offspring across the stars. "She is running," the tactical officer shouted. "All ships, intercept course now." The human fleet converged on the ascending Queen like wolves on wounded prey. Ships took hits and kept fighting, hull breaches and engine failures and casualties mounting by the minute, but no one turned back. The Queen was armored and dangerous, swatting aside smaller vessels with massive clawed limbs and spraying acidic compounds that ate through metal like water through sand. The Defiance took 3 direct hits that left her bleeding atmosphere and crew into the void. "Admiral," the helmsman called out, "our engines are failing. We cannot maintain pursuit." Kofi Asante looked at the Queen through his damaged view screen and made the last decision of his life. "All hands, abandon ship," he ordered calmly. "Get to the escape pods now." "Sir, what are you?" "That is an order." "Everyone off my ship." "I can still maneuver, and I can still reach her." His crew understood what he was planning, and though tears streamed down many faces, they obeyed. Kofi watched his people escape to safety, then turned his dying ship toward the Vorath Queen. "For New Tasmania," he said softly as the Defiance accelerated to ramming speed. "For humanity. Let the galaxy see what Deathworlders do when their people are threatened." The explosion was visible from the surface. The Defiance struck the Varth Queen at full speed and detonated her reactor core in a brilliant flash that lit up the sky like a second sun. The Queen was torn apart instantly, her massive body vaporized in the atomic fire. And without their Queen, the Vara swarm lost everything that made them dangerous. The hive mind connection shattered, leaving millions of creatures suddenly alone and confused. They became simple animals, dangerous but directionless, easy prey for the human soldiers who had spent 11 days learning exactly how to kill them. The systematic extermination took another 2 days, but the outcome was never in doubt. New Tasmania was saved. The cost was terrible. 14,000 humans dead and countless more wounded, an entire world scarred by fire and war. But 26,000 people survived, people who had been written off as acceptable losses by a galaxy that did not understand humanity. As the last Vorath died and the guns finally fell silent, a message went out to every human vessel and station in the galaxy. New Tasmania is secure. The Varth Queen is dead. Our people are safe. We came for them, and we brought them home. In the Concord Observation Center, 347 species sat in absolute silence. The Kreth War commander rose from his seat and performed an ancient gesture of his people, one reserved only for acknowledging the most worthy of adversaries. He was not alone. Across the chamber, representatives from a dozen species made similar gestures, symbols of respect and acknowledgement that crossed all cultural boundaries. The humans were not weak. They had never been weak, and the galaxy would never forget what it had witnessed. 1 year had passed since the Battle of New Tasmania, and the Galactic Concord Assembly looked very different from the chamber that had once laughed at humanity. Ambassador Yuan Mei Lin stood at the central podium where the Vel Ori, High Arbiter, had delivered that humiliating assessment of her species. And she looked out at 347 silent representatives with eyes that held neither anger nor triumph, only calm determination. 1 year ago, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive chamber. You told us we were weak. You told us our world was marginal and our species was fragile. You told us to accept the death of our people because that was simply the way of things. She activated a holographic display that filled the air above her with images from New Tasmania. The fire lines and the orbital strikes and the desperate battles that had saved the world. You were wrong. The display shifted to show Admiral Asante making his final charge, the Defiance blazing like a comet as it struck the Varth Queen. You called us soft bodies with no natural defenses, but you did not understand that our greatest defense is each other. We do not abandon our own. We fight for our families and our friends and for strangers we have never met, because they are human and that is enough. The display changed again, showing the recovered records from Earth's history. Images of ancient humans facing saber-toothed cats and mammoths with nothing but spears and courage. We come from a world where the air itself can catch fire. Mei Lin continued, where the water hides predators with more teeth than your darkest nightmares. We evolved alongside creatures that wanted to eat us, and we did not merely survive. We thrived. We built civilizations while fighting off parasites that lived inside our own bodies, while enduring diseases that could kill us in days, while facing predators and disasters and challenges that would have driven any sane species to extinction. Her voice hardened. You measured our skin and found it thin. You measured our bones and found them fragile. You measured our lifespan and found it short. But you never measured our hearts, and that is where our true strength lives. The Kreth War commander rose from his seat and approached the central floor, his massive form moving with unusual humility. Ambassador Yuan, he said, his deep voice echoing through the chamber, I owe you an apology. I called your people prey animals and soft ones, and I was blind to the truth. The Kreth Dominion formally recognizes humanity as worthy warriors and requests the honor of a defensive alliance. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as other representatives began to rise. The Vel Ori High Arbiter stepped forward with a chiming that the translator rendered as deep respect. On behalf of the Vel Ori Collective, I offer my personal apology for our flawed assessment, it said. We have reclassified your homeworld as a Class 7 Deathworld, one of only 12 such worlds in the known galaxy. Our scientists are still studying the New Tasmania recordings and finding new aspects of human biology that defy our understanding. What specifically? Mylin asked with genuine curiosity. Your concept of sleep, for example, the Arbiter replied. We classified it as a vulnerability. But we now understand it is actually a recovery mechanism that allows you to push your bodies far beyond normal limits. Your soldiers fought for days without proper rest, something our models said was impossible. Because they could draw on sleep debt and repay it later. The Arbiter's crystals flickered with what might have been embarrassment. We also completely misunderstood your pack bonding instincts. Other species form strong bonds with family and close allies, but humans will sacrifice themselves for complete strangers. Your medic who died holding that defensive position, Yuki Tanaka, she had never met those soldiers before that day. She died for people who were not her family, not her friends, barely even acquaintances. They were human, Malin said simply. That was enough. Yes, the Arbiter agreed. And that is perhaps the most terrifying thing about your species. You are not merely strong as individuals. You are strong as a collective, bound by bonds of loyalty that transcend all normal social structures. When one human suffers, all humans respond. When one human calls for help, all humans answer. More representatives came forward to offer alliances and trade agreements and formal apologies. But Mei Lin raised her hand for silence. Humanity did not come here seeking apologies, she declared, and we did not fight at New Tasmania to prove ourselves to the galaxy. We fought because our people needed us, and we will always fight for our people, no matter what the galaxy thinks of us. She looked around the chamber with fierce pride. But we have learned something important from this experience. The Concord Protocol for extinction-level threats is to quarantine and abandon. When the Vareth came, you were prepared to sacrifice 40,000 human lives, because that was easier than fighting. Her voice rang out with certainty. That stops now. Humanity is establishing the Terran Intervention Course, a rapid response force that will answer calls for help that the Concord considers impossible. When worlds face swarms or pirates or disasters, when people are written off as acceptable losses, humans will come. You would risk your own people to save other species, the Kreth commander asked with obvious surprise. Yes, Mei Lin replied without hesitation, because that is who we are. We are Deathworlders. We face death every day from the moment we are born. And we have learned that the only way to survive is to stand together. That lesson does not stop at the borders of our species. The assembly erupted in debate and discussion, but the outcome was already clear. Within months, the Terran Intervention Corps was officially recognized by the Concord, staffed by human volunteers who trained specifically for impossible missions. Within years, they had answered dozens of calls across the galaxy, saving lives that the Concord had written off and earning a reputation that spread to every corner of known space. When you needed help that no one else would give, you called the humans. When you faced threats that no one else would fight, you called the humans. When all hope was lost and the galaxy had abandoned you, you called the humans. Because humans never abandoned anyone. On New Tasmania, a memorial wall stood in the rebuilt capital city, bearing the names of 14,000 people who had died so that 26,000 could live. Below those names, a single phrase was carved in 347 languages. They were told we could not be saved. They came anyway, Every year on the anniversary of the battle, humans gathered at that wall to honor those who had fallen. And every year, representatives from other species joined them, laying flowers and offerings from 100 different worlds. A 13-year-old girl named Sarah Chun stood before the wall in the uniform of the Terran Intervention Corps' junior cadets. Her eyes wet with tears as she remembered the terrifying days she had spent coordinating refugees while the sky burned. A craft dignitary approached her with careful steps, his massive form somehow gentle as he knelt to meet her eyes. "Young one," he said, "I have studied the recordings from the battle. I saw what you did, coordinating thousands of people while barely more than a child. How did you find such courage?" Sarah looked at the names on the wall, at the memory of people who had given everything for strangers they had never met. "Someone had to help," she said simply, "and we are really good at not dying." The Kreth commander stared at her for a long moment, then made the gesture of respect that his people reserve for the greatest of warriors. "Yes," he said softly, "yes you are. And across the galaxy, in countless languages and cultures, the story of New Tasmania was told and retold. A reminder to all who heard it that humanity was not weak, had never been weak, and would never abandon their own no matter what the cost. Because that was what Deathworlders did. They faced death, and they won.